Hello, Dr. Miaken Zeigler of Zeigler Chiropractic. Welcome to our workshop tonight. The topic is the importance of community. And what is the opposite of community? That is isolation. And tonight we are going to really look at some research that is showing some pretty dire numbers and data in terms of when we isolate ourselves, when we are not in community and surrounded by people who are really supportive and in connection. And before I go there, I first want you just to take a moment. I appreciate you being here. There's a lot of things you could be doing. There are a lot of things that your friends, your acquaintances, people out there in the world are doing right now that are not intentional in terms of showing up for a 30-minute conversation on something that could uplift and bring vitality to your health. So first, thank you for being here. And second, when you really are present for the next 30 minutes that we are together, it helps you accountable to doing what is most right for your health, right? There is not a lack of information out there. In fact, we have more information available to us than any other time in history. And yet you look at the health of our world, the state that our world is in, and it doesn't reflect all the things that we know to do. So that's where when you do things that hold you accountable in doing what is most right, and you hear the information over and over, and you are connected with people who are doing similar things, that is where we start to see change. So what's killing us? The conversation tonight is really looking at isolation and how it impacts our genetic expression, how it impacts our life expectancy and illness. There's never been a time before where the world has gone through a pandemic of this magnitude and degree, where we have been completely isolated or told that isolation is the best thing we can do to preserve our health. And what is the impact of that? Okay, that's what we're going to look at tonight. So let's talk about genetics first. Did you know that a practicing doctor today who has been out 10 years, 15, 20, 30 years, if you look at the textbooks that they learn from when it comes to genetics, it would be against the law in teaching those topics based on the science that we know now. It would be against the law to use those textbooks now. The science is never settled. In fact, we are constantly learning from what we've done and realizing, oh, now that we know more information, what the science said then does not necessarily apply for or represent what is and what we know now, right? So we are constantly asking ourselves questions on how do things work? Where does this come from? And when it comes to genetics, if you ask our parents, right, they would say, oh, this is in my genes. I have the genetics for this, right? Oh, my mom, my grandma had migraines, so I am destined to have migraines because it's in my genes, right? But what we're learning is there's this topic called epigenetics. And epigenetics is the study of how your lifestyle choices impact your genetic expression. So impact the genes that are turned on or turned off, and how those genes are expressed through your physiology. Okay, so we can't change the genes, but we can turn the genes on and off to create a coding that can mean health, or that can mean disease, that can mean inflammation, that can mean vitality and anti-inflammation. It can mean depression, or it can mean healthier, more positive mental outlook, right? So, which is really cool. That means that you are not destined to get XYZ because of your genes. You can change that. And when you change and support a higher level of genetic expression, you change your life expectancy and you change, you know, the potential illness that you could experience. So epigenetics, anything that changes a gene, genes affect without changing the actual DNA sequence. So organisms quickly respond to fast changes in social environments to survive. That's what we talk about, isolation. Social environments, our genes can immediately change. It is immediate. Pretty amazing how quickly they can change based on our environment and in terms of how we experience our environment in social settings. So let's go there. Let's see here. Here we go. What is going on? Okay, there we go. So a recent analysis have challenged this view by discovering broad alterations in the expression of human genes as a function of differing socio-environmental conditions. This is Dr. Steve Cole, and he is the forefront, you know, researcher on how isolation is impacting our genetic expression, impacting our life expectancy and our health. And what he's found is that depending on our socio environment that we are in and what we're, the lifestyle we're brought up in, our family environment, socioeconomic status, that impacts our genetic expression in a very profound way. So what we know to be true is changing, right? Back to what is happening in our genes is not what we are meant to experience or have in life. It's how those genes express themselves. So gene expression is different depending on if a person is lonely or socially secure. So this is a study out of the Department of Medicine, out of UCLA School of Medicine. And again, this is Dr. Stephen Cole. And what they did was they looked at the social connects of folks in Chicago, of 153 healthy Chicagoans in their 50s and 60s. And they identified the 8 most socially secure people and the 66 loneliest people of that 153. And they drew blood samples from them. And then they extracted the genetic material from the blood's leukocytes. That's a white blood cell, and looked at what their DNA was made up of. And what he found was a strong pattern of genetic expression response that would be mighty familiar over the next few years. Of roughly 22,000 genes in the human genome, the lonely and not lonely group showed sharply different gene expression responses in 209 genes. That meant that about 1% of the genome, a considerable portion, was responding differently depending on whether a person felt alone or connected. So whole sectors of genes looked markedly different, and many of these genes played a role in the inflammatory immune response. Okay? So your genetic expression is who you are, and it varies depending on the life you live and who you're connected with. Okay. So let's go back to this slide. So many of these genes play a role in the inflammatory response. And in the lonely population, 78 genes that work together to increase inflammation were busier than usual, even when they were lonely and not even sick. So the loneliest of people turned on an inflammatory genetic sequencing that showed up and was busier, were the words they used, and it had nothing to do with whether they were sick or not. Okay, so they were showing more inflammation within their system based on being lonely alone. Okay. So in the lonely population, 131 genes that usually cooperate to control inflammation were underactive. And these underactive genes also included key antiviral genes. So let's just take this into perspective, right? These are the loneliest people, most isolated, disconnected from their community. And just by that alone, turned on inflammatory sequencing in their genetic expression, okay? And it inhibited the genes that usually cooperate to control inflammation. These genes became underactive or weren't even doing their job. And these genes are also important for antiviral activity. So we've isolated people and said, this is the best way to protect yourself from a virus, right? Again, the goal and the concept is good, right? But what's happening when that person is isolated is they become more inflammatory. They're unable to manage that inflammation process within their body. And as a result, they are unable to respond to viruses when they're exposed to them. And so we see a suppressed immune system. Okay, so it's kind of counterintuitive to what we're going for here. And that's just if you're lonely. So your genetic expression makes you who you are and varies depending on the life that you live. Now, another great quote from Dr. Stephen Cole is, this is his take on social isolation. Stress is a good risk factor for disease, but social isolation is the best established, most robust social or psychological risk factor for disease out there. Nothing can compete. Okay, so we say, what causes disease? Stress, right? We all know stress causes disease, right? Whether it's a physical stress, postural distortions that we take on and carry throughout our day for 9, 10, 11 hours in front of a computer or workstation, right? A car accident, impact on a football field, concussion, right? We can understand those physical stressors. What about the chemical stressors, right? We are exposed to and live in a city where there's tons of traffic. So we've got exhaust and dust particles, and we've got pollen. We've got foods that we eat that are highly stressful, that impact the chemistry of our physiology, right? Or we've got the emotional and mental component of stress, which I would say the social isolation falls into, but stress related to work or personal relationships or finances or past traumas that we've experienced, family dynamics, right? You take all of those stresses, right? It's a good risk factor for disease, but the leading researcher is saying to us that you take that stress, it doesn't even compare. It does not even hold a candle to the psychological risk factor for disease when it comes to isolation. Nothing can compete. So I'm going to ask you right now, are you isolated? Do you have a community around you that uplifts you? Are you connected to your neighbor, your family, your friends? Because that is the number one most robust indicator as to health or disease, is if you are isolated. And that is why I love our community here at Zeigler Chiropractic. People who choose to get chiropractic care. Yes, you're doing it because you want to be healthier. You want to be out of pain. That's probably why you first came into the office, right? And as you learned about your health and how important it is to have a healthy moving spine, right? How your lifestyle choices impact your trajectory in life and in health, your vitality and how you express yourself, right? You've decided, I'm going to continue this because not only do I feel better when I get adjusted, but I function better. I am a better person. And guess what? When you show up here, you're showing up here with other individuals who are making a similar choice and who are in community with you and wanting to connect. So not only are you getting connected here, right? you're also connecting with others around you. And personal touch, being in connection, getting a hug, that physical connection is so vital for our health. So that's where my headspace, when I am adjusting you, is in a place of wanting to bring you higher connection and vitality and life to your body, because human touch is sacred. And when we apply the adjustment, that is sacred in terms of our intent to reconnect you to a higher, more expressive intelligence. And you're here with other people. So if you experienced a disconnect or some isolation, you know, over this last year and a half, and you were coming into the office, can you imagine those people who didn't even want to step outside of their home, right? By far the worst risk factor we can have for disease. Nothing compares to it. So make sure I have this. So only 10% of how long we live is determined by our genes. That means the other 90% is based on our lifestyle choices. We find that genetic influences on lifespan are minimal prior to the age of 60, but increase thereafter. These findings provide a support for the search for genes affecting longevity in humans, especially at advanced ages. So you're below 60, your genetics, they're there, but it's 10% of that. And it increases once you hit 60 and after. So how important is it that you do the work now? That's the only time you can do it, is now, right? You want to wait till you're 60 when those genetic, you know, the genes and what's been passed down to you, it has more of an influence, right? What you do now makes a difference for years to come. So people who live in community and are connected to others, this is what the research is showing. They live longer, they have a positive genetic expression. And if you have a positive genetic expression, that's good because your gene expression makes you who you are. So that means you're probably going to be looking at the cup half full, probably going to be living life more in joy, positivity, love, wanting to be connected with others, right? And your genetic expression varies depending on the life that you live. So I want to share with you a couple more studies that have come out, because I think that it's shocking to look at how your community and how you live impacts how your body expresses itself. So this was a study out of the University of Illinois, and it's done on honeybees. And this is what they found. So this is Dr. Gene Robinson. So Dr. Robinson knew if you moved bees to a new colony in the first day of life, the colony accepts them as its own. So what he did is he took killer bees, he took two separate bees and transferred them to different colonies. So they're killer bees that he took to a European killer bees. Okay, so he expected killer bees to take on European bees moderate ways and vice versa. So the experiment took place in Mexico, Center for Research in Animal Physiology. 250 of the youngest bees were pulled from each hive, their backs painted, and they switched them to the hives of the other subspecies. Okay. What he found is that the DNA of each bees changed. The genes generally don't change during an organism's lifetime, random mutations aside. So what he found is that the actual genetic expression, the genes changed based on the community that those bees were living in. So the killer bees, really aggressive, really mean, right? The European bees more moderate. So when you move the European bees to the killer bee hive, they found, holy cow, We're actually seeing these genes change to take on, the reflection of the bees around them. They're turning into the killer bees. That's pretty cool. So most cells in our body contain every one of our 22,000 or so genes at any given time. And only a small percentage of these genes are active, sending out chemical messages that affect the activity of the cell. So this variable gene activity is called genetic expression. So what is your environment? Who are you surrounding yourself with? If you are isolated and you are disconnected, turns on an inflammatory response within the body, shuts off modulators of that inflammatory response, and leaves you predisposed to illness based on what you're exposed to. Versus if you are connected and in loving relationships with those around you, you are uplifted, your genetic expression literally reflects that. It is anti-inflammatory. So this is what they found. Genes don't make you who you are. Your genetic expression makes you who you are. Genetic expression varies based on the life you live. Dr. Robinson proposed that the environment can spin the dials of the giant sectors of genes across the genome. He suspected that an individual's social environment has a powerful effect on this genetic expression. And each day, the bees acted more like their new hive mates, not their genetic siblings. Their dispositions changed to match their hive mates. The genome, without changing its code, could transform an animal into something very different from its subspecies. They didn't just act like a different bee, they became different bees. Our genome is fluid. That just gave me goosebumps. They didn't just act like it, they transformed. So what are you transforming into right now based on the community and social environment you live in? This is the other one I wanted to share with you. Based on your social environment, okay? This is some research out of University of British Columbia. And they wanted to look at the genetic expression of profiles of 31 kids aged 9 to 18 who had asthma. 15 were from well-off families, 16 were from poor families. And they expected to find the kids from well-off families show a healthy immune response with elevated activity among the genes that control pulmonary inflammation. And what they found, kids from poor families showed busier inflammatory genes, sluggish response in the gene network controlling inflammation. Poor families showed more asthma attacks and other health problems. The researchers studied their blood, gathered social economic information, and showed them films of ambiguous or awkward social situations and asked how threatening they found them. The poorer kids perceived more threat, while the well-off kids perceived less threat. So they call it cognitive framing, and there is a difference. They found some kids broke this type. Some of the wealthy kids perceived more threat and vice versa. They found that the kids framing, not their income, that accounted for most of the difference in gene expression. The main thing that drove the immune response was not poverty, but whether the child saw the world as scary or not. So again, not looking at income alone, but looking at where do these families live? What is their environment? Do children grow up in an environment where they are scared and concerned about, can they play in their community? Can they be connected to others? Are they uplifted? Or are they concerned and scared? Or the opposite, are they feeling safe in their environment, right? So it had nothing to do with income, but the environment in which they lived impacted their ability to perceive threats, whether it's real or not. So does your child see the world as scary or not, right? And this is 9 to 18. Our brains are still developing. And this is the last one I wanted to share with you. Because we kind of think, no way, no way. Social isolation, no way that could be worse than any stress. They did a study, this is a Kaufman study out of Yale, 57 school-age kids who were so badly abused, they were removed from their homes. And they studied a specific genetic expression, which is called the SERT, the serotonin transport gene, which is considered the depression risk gene. And they found that people who were showing this SERT gene were more likely to become depressed or anxious when faced with trauma and stress. And kids with this SERT gene had double as many mental health problems as those with not showing this gene. And here's what they found. The kids who had the single modest, loosely defined social connection erased 80% of their risk related to this SERT gene variant and abuse. So what that means is, let me just back up here. They took kids who were so badly abused, they had to completely remove them from their home. Okay. They looked at what is their genetic expression? Are they showing this risk factor for the depression gene? And let's use that to modulate how we create their social connections to see if that gene has a higher expression or less expression. And they found that just one social connection on a monthly basis completely erased 80% of that genetic expression showing up. One social connection in a month, which I find it hard to even define that as a social connection. So he said, it came close to inoculating the kids against both an established genetic vulnerability and horrid abuse. So the lack of a reliable connection harmed the kids almost as much as the abuse did. The isolation is as toxic as the abuse. So we're talking about abused children removed from their homes. And the researchers are saying that isolation is just as bad as that abusive situation. Right? So this is where they're saying people who are in community, are connected to the others, live longer, have a positive genetic expression, change, the life that they live, right? So important. So in this moment, this is you and I. We are choosing not to be isolated. I am challenging you. How can you find better connection? When you are here in this office, right? You show up, we connect you through your adjustment, allow your body to better express itself, but you are in connection to other people, right? Embrace this community we have here for you, because people who are showing up here are doing the things that you are doing. And how can you choose to be in community, be in connection? Because this isolation is killing us. This isolation is leaving you predisposed to more stress, more inflammation within the body, and a body that is less likely to be able to handle and respond any exposure to a pathogen. Virus, bacteria, doesn't matter, right? If there's one thing we can do is be in connection. And what of those you have left home or at work? There are people who need to hear this and need to understand when you isolate yourself, it is the worst thing you can do. How can you engage with your family or your friends or your colleagues in a way that can uplift them and literally transform their genetic expression? And they need to be here. They need to hear this message, and they need to understand how important chiropractic can be for their health, for their brain, for their function, for their life, right? And I'm here to support you. So I appreciate you being here tonight. I appreciate you engaging with me to hear what some of the research is showing in terms of isolation and how it impacts our health, our genes, our expression. It's everything. So when you are here with us, you are uplifting us and you are creating a more vitalistic expression for us in our office. So thank you for being there. Thank you for showing up. And know that that is reciprocated. And I want that for you, and I want that for your families and your friends. So if you have somebody who doesn't know what we know, I ask that you invite them in or send them this workshop. so that they can at least start to hear something that is positive and supportive and empowering, that there's something you can do, right? Our bodies are amazing. You have everything you need within you to heal, to express a higher level of vitality. And it is through being in community that it's one of the easiest things you can do. So I love and appreciate you. Thank you for being a part of our community. And I look forward to seeing you in our office next time. So Dr. Miaken Zeigler of Zeigler Chiropractic, and I will see you on the flip side.